Ely State Prison sits in one of the most remote regions of the United States, surrounded by desert, mountains, and silence. Built to house Nevada's most dangerous and high-risk inmates, it has become synonymous with extreme isolation, strict control, and long-term segregation. According to court filings, investigative journalism, and state records, Ely represents the far edge of American incarceration, where security outweighs rehabilitation and where human endurance is tested daily. This documentary examines how Ely earned its reputation, what life is like inside its walls, and why it remains one of the most controversial prisons in the country. The first thing people say about Ely State Prison is that it was designed so no one ever forgets where they are. Not the inmates, not the staff, not even the people who built it. According to Nevada Department of Corrections records, the prison sits hundreds of miles from major cities, planted deliberately in isolation. The surrounding landscape is harsh and empty, with long stretches of desert highway and little sign of civilization. That isolation is not accidental. It is the foundation of everything that happens inside. Before anyone reaches the prison gates, they pass miles of open land where radio signals fade and cell service disappears. Locals who live nearby describe the prison as something that feels separate from the rest of the state, a self-contained world operating on its own rules. According to news reports, this location was chosen in part to limit escape risk and outside interference, but also means that once someone enters Ely, distance itself becomes a form of control. Ely State Prison opened in 1989 as a maximum security facility, but its role expanded quickly. Court documents and state oversight reports show that it became the primary destination for inmates classified as the highest security risks in Nevada's system. These were individuals deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, or too difficult to manage in other prisons. Ely was not designed for short stays. Many who arrived were expected to remain for years, sometimes decades. The prison's architecture reflects that purpose. Thick concrete walls, narrow corridors, reinforced doors, and limited sight lines define the layout. According to official facility descriptions, much of Ely operates on a single-cell model, with inmates confined alone for most hours of the day. The design reduces contact, limits movement, and minimizes unpredictability. But it also creates an environment where isolation becomes routine. Former correctional officers interviewed in investigative reports have described Ely as one of the most controlled environments they ever worked in. Movement is scheduled down to the minute. Doors open and close electronically. Counts are frequent and strict. Any deviation, any uncertainty, is treated as a potential threat. The margin for error is intentionally small. For inmates, the experience begins long before they see their cell. Intake at Ely follows a process outlined in internal policy manuals and confirmed by legal filings. Personal belongings are confiscated. Medical and psychological screenings are conducted quickly, often under pressure due to staffing and time constraints. Classification decisions are made based on past behavior, charges, and perceived risk. Once assigned, inmates are escorted through a series of locked doors, each one separating them further from the outside world. One former inmate, identified in court records under a pseudonym, later described the walk to his cell as the moment he realized Ely was different from anywhere he had been before. He said the silence was louder than noise, broken only by the mechanical hum of ventilation and the distant echo of steel doors. According to his testimony, there was no shouting, no chaos, just a sense of finality. Ely's reputation is tied closely to its use of long-term segregation, often referred to in reports as administrative segregation or disciplinary segregation. According to lawsuits filed in federal court, some inmates have spent years in near-total isolation, confined to their cells for up to 23 hours a day. Human rights organizations and legal advocates have argued that such conditions can cause severe psychological harm, citing studies and expert testimony presented in litigation. State officials, however, have defended Ely's practices as necessary for safety. In public statements and court filings, the Nevada Department of Corrections has argued that Ely houses individuals who pose an extreme risk to others and to institutional order. They maintain that segregation is used to prevent violence, manage gang activity, and protect both staff and inmates. Gang affiliation has played a significant role in Ely's history. According to law enforcement reports and court documents, the prison has housed members of various prison gangs, some with connections extending beyond Nevada. These affiliations influence housing decisions, movement schedules, and security protocols. Intelligence units within the prison monitor communications closely, searching for signs of coordination or retaliation. But control does not eliminate tension. It compresses it. According to investigative journalism published over the past 2 decades, Ely has experienced multiple incidents involving assaults, self-harm, and confrontations between inmates and staff. Many of these incidents occurred out of public view, documented only later through internal reports, lawsuits, or investigative findings. Medical care at Ely has also been the subject of scrutiny. Court filings allege delays in treatment, inadequate mental health services, and insufficient staffing. In several cases, families of inmates have filed wrongful death lawsuits, claiming that warning signs were ignored or responses were too slow. The state has disputed many of these claims, but records show that oversight bodies have repeatedly called for reforms. For correctional staff, Ely presents its own challenges. According to interviews and labor reports, officers work in an environment where constant vigilance is required. The isolation affects them as well. Shifts are long. Backup is limited by distance and staffing levels. In emergencies, response times can be critical. Former staff members have described a culture where professionalism is essential, but stress is unavoidable. One former officer, speaking anonymously in a news investigation, described Ely as a place where routine never truly feels routine. He said every door opening, every escort, every count carries the weight of what could go wrong if attention slips. According to his account, the prison trains officers to expect the unexpected because complacency can be dangerous. Despite its severity, Ely has largely remained out of the public spotlight compared to other Supermax facilities. Its remote location and limited media access mean that much of what happens inside emerges slowly, often years later through legal challenges or investigative reporting. When stories do surface, they tend to raise difficult questions about punishment, safety, and the limits of confinement. One of the most debated issues surrounding Ely is the psychological impact of extreme isolation. Expert witnesses in federal cases have testified that prolonged segregation can lead to anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. Some inmates, according to medical records cited in lawsuits, experienced worsening mental health conditions during their time at Ely. State officials have acknowledged these concerns in part, pointing to policy adjustments and increased mental health screenings over the years. But critics argue that changes have been incremental and insufficient. According to advocacy groups, Ely represents a broader national debate about whether Supermax prisons can balance security with humane treatment. As night falls over Ely State Prison, the facility settles into a controlled stillness. Lights remain on in many units. Doors are secured. Counts are completed again and again. Inmates lie on narrow bunks, separated by concrete and steel, while officers monitor from control rooms lined with screens and switches. The desert outside grows quiet, but inside, the systems never stop running. This is the foundation of Ely's legacy. A prison built for containment, designed for permanence, and defined by extremes. Ely State Prison does not announce itself with noise. There are no sirens echoing across the desert. No shouting that carries beyond the fence line. What defines Ely is silence, thick, deliberate, engineered. According to Nevada Department of Corrections records, the prison was designed to hold the state's most dangerous and disruptive inmates, the ones officials determined could not be safely managed anywhere else. The result is a facility where movement is minimized, contact is restricted, and time itself seems to slow. The prison sits in one of the most remote regions of Nevada, far from major cities, surrounded by open land and mountains that stretch for miles. News reports have repeatedly noted that the isolation is not accidental. Ely's location reduces escape risk and limits outside interference. But that same isolation also shapes life inside the walls. Once inmates arrive here, transfers are rare. For many, Ely is not a temporary stop. It is the end of a line. According to publicly available correctional documents, Ely State Prison houses a large population in administrative segregation and long-term isolation. Inmates may spend up to 23 hours a day alone in their cells. Meals are delivered through slots in reinforced steel doors. Recreation, when allowed, often takes place in small, enclosed yards surrounded by concrete walls and metal fencing. Human interaction is limited, structured, and constantly monitored. Former correctional officers interviewed by Nevada media outlets have described Ely as a place where routine is everything. Every movement follows protocol. Every deviation triggers an immediate response. Doors open only when instructed. Conversations are brief, purposeful, and documented. This level of control, officials argue, is necessary due to the inmate population. Ely has housed individuals convicted of multiple homicides, inmates with extensive histories of prison violence, and those identified by intelligence units as ongoing security threats. But control does not eliminate tension. According to court filings and investigative journalism, Ely has experienced multiple incidents involving inmate violence, staff assaults, and prolonged lockdowns. These events rarely resemble chaotic riots seen in other facilities. Instead, they unfold quietly, surgically, often involving a single cell, a single tear, a single moment when pressure breaks through restraint. One former inmate, referred to in court documents under a pseudonym for safety, described Ely as mentally exhausting rather than physically chaotic. He stated that the constant isolation, the absence of normal social cues, and the unchanging environment created a psychological strain that never fully lifted. Experts cited in those same filings noted that long-term isolation can intensify anxiety, paranoia, and emotional volatility, particularly in individuals already struggling with mental health issues. Medical and mental health care at Ely has also been the subject of scrutiny. According to multiple lawsuits filed against the Nevada Department of Corrections, some inmates allege delays in medical treatment and limited access to mental health professionals. The department has disputed several of these claims, stating in official responses that care meets constitutional standards. In some cases, federal courts allowed claims to proceed. In others, judges dismissed them due to insufficient evidence. What remains undisputed is that Ely's environment amplifies every weakness in the system. When something goes wrong, there is little margin for error. Gang dynamics inside Ely are different from those in lower security prisons. According to law enforcement intelligence reports cited in state oversight hearings, Ely does not operate on open yard politics in the traditional sense. Instead, affiliations are managed through communication networks, coded messages, and indirect influence. Contact is limited, but influence persists. Officials monitor correspondence, phone calls, and movements carefully, aware that even minimal interaction can carry weight. A former NDOC official told reporters that Ely functions less like a prison community and more like a series of sealed compartments. Each unit is isolated from the others. Each inmate exists within a narrow physical and social space. This design reduces large-scale violence, but increases the intensity of individual encounters. When conflict occurs, it is often sudden and severe. One documented incident, referenced in a Nevada Inspector General report, involved an attack that occurred during a routine escort. The inmate involved had no recent disciplinary write-ups and was considered compliant. The attack lasted seconds. Officers responded immediately. The unit was locked down for days. Investigators later concluded that the incident stemmed from long-standing tension unrelated to the immediate circumstances. In Ely, history travels silently. Staff working at Ely face their own challenges. According to union statements and legislative testimony, correctional officers at the facility experience high levels of stress and burnout. Staffing shortages have occasionally required mandatory overtime. Officers describe the environment as hypervigilant. Mistakes are costly. Complacency is dangerous. Many officers rotate out after a few years, citing mental fatigue. Yet despite these pressures, Ely is often described by officials as one of the most controlled facilities in the region. Escapes are virtually non-existent. Large-scale disturbances are rare. From an administrative perspective, the system works. From a human perspective, the cost is harder to measure. Families of inmates housed at Ely have spoken to journalists about the difficulty of maintaining relationships. The prison's remote location makes visitation challenging. Weather conditions can close roads. Travel requires time, money, and planning. Phone calls are limited. Letters are delayed. Over time, connections fray. For many inmates, the outside world becomes abstract. According to criminologists cited in national publications, prisons like Ely raise fundamental questions about the purpose of incarceration. Is the goal punishment, control, rehabilitation, or containment? Ely's design prioritizes security above all else. Rehabilitation programs exist, but access is limited by classification status. Education opportunities are fewer than in lower security facilities. Progress is slow, incremental, and often invisible. This is not about portraying Ely as uniquely cruel or uniquely effective. It is about understanding what happens when a system is pushed to its most extreme form. Ely State Prison represents the outer boundary of American incarceration policy. It is where the state sends those it believes cannot be managed anywhere else. According to public records, Ely continues to operate under constant review. Audits, inspections, and litigation shape policy adjustments. Some reforms have been implemented quietly. Others remain under debate. What has not changed is the fundamental nature of the institution. Ely is built to contain risk, not resolve it. For the men inside, time does not move forward in the usual way. Days blend together. Seasons pass unnoticed. The outside world changes, but Ely remains largely the same. Concrete, steel, silence. There are no shouting crowds outside the gates. No lines of visitors pressing against fences. No surrounding neighborhoods to remind you that the world is still moving. Instead, there is silence. A vast, open desert silence that feels deliberate, as if the prison was placed here precisely so nothing could hear it. According to Nevada Department of Corrections records, Ely State Prison sits hundreds of miles from the state's largest population centers, isolated by design. The geography is not accidental. Officials have acknowledged in public statements that the location was chosen to reduce escape risk and external interference. If someone were to make it beyond the perimeter, they would still face hours, sometimes days, of exposure, distance, and emptiness before encountering another human being. That isolation shapes everything that happens inside. By the time an inmate reaches Ely, they have already been classified as among the highest risk individuals in the state system. Many arrive after incidents at other facilities, assaults, repeated rule violations, or threats deemed credible by prison intelligence units. According to court filings and investigative reporting, Ely has long been used as a containment solution rather than a rehabilitative environment. It is where the system sends people it believes it cannot manage anywhere else. The architecture reinforces that philosophy. Cells are designed to minimize contact. Doors are solid steel. Windows are narrow. Movement is calculated down to the minute. According to NDOC operational manuals referenced in public oversight reports, inmates in high-security housing may spend up to 23 hours a day alone in their cells. Recreation, when permitted, often occurs in small, enclosed spaces sometimes referred to in reports as exercise pens, where individuals remain physically separated from others. Former inmates who later spoke to journalists described the experience as a kind of controlled erasure. Not violent in the way movies portray prison violence, but relentless in its repetition. The same walls, the same sounds, the same routine, day after day. In this environment, tension does not explode outward. It compresses inward. Correctional officers assigned to Ely operate under a different psychological burden than those in lower security facilities. According to testimony given in labor hearings and internal reports obtained by news organizations, staff shortages and long shifts have been persistent challenges. Officers describe working extended hours in an environment where every interaction carries risk and where mistakes, miscounts, delayed responses, miscommunications can have severe consequences. One former officer, speaking anonymously in a regional investigation, described Ely as quiet until it isn't. The warning signs are subtle. A change in posture, a refusal to comply that lasts a second too long, a look held just a moment longer than necessary. When violence does occur, it is often sudden and contained, unfolding in spaces where cameras cannot capture every angle. Public records show that Ely has experienced multiple incidents over the years involving assaults on staff and inmates, some resulting in serious injury or death. Details are often limited, sealed by internal investigations or ongoing litigation, but patterns emerge across reporting. Delays in response, restricted visibility. Inmates who had previously been flagged as high risk but remained in general housing due to space constraints. The desert does not create these problems, but it hides them. Inside the prison, time behaves differently. Inmates mark days not by dates, but by routines. Count times, meal trays, lights on, lights off. According to mental health evaluations cited in court challenges to prolonged isolation, this environment can distort perception and emotional regulation. Individuals may become hyperalert, withdrawn, or emotionally blunted. These effects are documented in multiple studies referenced in legal filings concerning Supermax confinement across the United States. Ely is not unique in this respect, but its isolation intensifies the effect. There are moments when the system strains under its own weight. In one incident documented in state investigative summaries, a lockdown extended far longer than originally planned due to staffing shortages and a simultaneous medical emergency elsewhere in the facility. Inmates remained confined without showers or recreation. Officers rotated shifts under exhaustion. The tension escalated quietly, not through riots or fires, but through refusals. Refusals to cuff up. Refusals to comply immediately. Refusals that force confrontation. These moments rarely make national headlines. They appear instead in administrative reports, grievance filings, and internal memos. Paper trails that only surface later, if at all. What makes Ely especially feared is not the frequency of violence, but the certainty of consequences when it occurs. Emergency medical services are distant. Backup is limited by geography. According to public records, transport times to outside hospitals can take hours, depending on weather and availability. This reality influences every decision made inside the facility, from use of force calculations to lockdown protocols. Every response is weighed against distance. For inmates, this knowledge becomes part of the psychological landscape. Help exists, but it is far away. Intervention exists, but it is delayed. The system functions, but slowly, deliberately, and without flexibility. Some former inmates interviewed after release or transfer described Ely as a place where hope contracts, not because nothing ever changes, but because change moves too slowly to feel real. Programs exist, but access is limited. Contact with family is possible, but visits are rare due to distance. Legal communication continues, but the sense of urgency fades under routine. The prison becomes the horizon. From the outside, Ely appears controlled, orderly, secure. According to official statements, escape attempts are extremely rare and successful escapes virtually non-existent. This reinforces the facility's reputation as effective. But effectiveness measured solely by containment ignores what builds beneath the surface. Oversight organizations have repeatedly emphasized that prolonged isolation carries long-term psychological consequences. Court challenges in Nevada and elsewhere have questioned whether such conditions meet constitutional standards when applied indefinitely. Some reforms have been proposed, some implemented. Many remain under debate. Ely sits at the center of that debate. It represents a question the American correctional system has not fully answered: what to do with individuals it fears it cannot manage, but cannot release. As night falls over the desert, the prison lights remain constant. From a distance, they appear almost fragile against the darkness, a cluster of illumination surrounded by nothing. Inside, officers conduct final counts. Doors close. Radios crackle briefly, then fall silent. For those inside Ely, the night does not bring rest. It brings continuity. Tomorrow will look like today, and the day after that, and the day after that. This is not chaos. It is control pushed to its extreme. And in that extremity, pressure builds, not explosively but steadily. The final fallout of Ely State Prison does not arrive with a single headline or one dramatic turning point. It arrives quietly, through paperwork, policy changes, court rulings, and the slow realization that even the most secure prison in America cannot escape the consequences of what happens inside its walls. Ely was built to contain the men the system deemed most dangerous, most disruptive, or most likely to break any other prison. What it ultimately revealed was something far more unsettling: that extreme isolation, absolute control, and total silence come at a cost that cannot be measured only in security metrics. By the late 2010s, Ely had become a focal point in national conversations about solitary confinement and Supermax incarceration. According to court filings and reporting by major news outlets, the prison held one of the highest proportions of inmates in long-term isolation in the United States. Some men had spent more than a decade in near-total confinement, locked in small concrete cells for 22 to 24 hours a day, with minimal human contact and limited access to programs. These were not rumors or activist exaggerations. These were figures documented in lawsuits, state audits, and sworn declarations. The legal pressure began building long before the public took notice. Attorneys representing Ely inmates filed multiple suits alleging violations of constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. According to court documents, the claims focused on prolonged solitary confinement, inadequate mental health care, and conditions that experts said could cause irreversible psychological harm. Nevada officials defended Ely as a necessary tool, arguing in filings that the prison housed individuals who posed extreme risks to staff and other inmates. Both sides cited data. Both sides cited expert testimony. The question was not whether Ely was secure. The question was whether security alone justified the human cost. One of the most consequential cases centered on the use of indefinite isolation. According to legal records, inmates could remain in administrative segregation for years without a clear pathway back to general population. Reviews were conducted, but critics argued they were perfunctory, offering little real opportunity for change. Federal judges did not order Ely closed, but they did scrutinize the system closely. Their rulings sent a clear message: extreme isolation required extreme justification. Inside the prison, the effects of that scrutiny were subtle but noticeable. According to former staff members interviewed by journalists, procedures changed. Documentation increased. Reviews became more formal. Mental health staff were given expanded roles, though critics said resources still lagged behind need. Ely did not transform overnight. It adjusted incrementally under the weight of oversight. For the men inside, the fallout was personal. Some inmates were gradually moved out of the most restrictive housing units as policies evolved. Others remained, deemed too dangerous or too unstable for any other placement. According to public reports, even those who left isolation often struggled to adapt. Years of silence do not prepare a person for conversation. Years of control do not prepare a person for choice. The damage, experts testified, does not disappear when a door opens. Former inmates who later spoke publicly described Ely as a place that stripped away time itself. Days blended together. Memories faded. The outside world became abstract. According to psychological evaluations cited in litigation, long-term isolation can alter perception, emotional regulation, and cognitive function. Ely's legacy, in this sense, extended far beyond its perimeter fence. It followed men into other prisons, into parole hearings, and sometimes into the free world. The fallout also reached Nevada's correctional leadership. Legislative hearings questioned the cost of maintaining a prison so remote and so restrictive. Ely is located hundreds of miles from major population centers, making staffing difficult and expensive. According to state budget documents, turnover rates were high. Recruitment was constant. Training costs mounted. Ely was not just a moral challenge. It was a logistical one. At the same time, prison officials pointed to a stark reality. Ely did what it was designed to do. Escapes were virtually non-existent. Large-scale riots were rare. High-risk inmates were contained. In a system that had seen violence erupt in less secure facilities, Ely was often cited as the final line of defense. This tension between effectiveness and ethics defined every debate surrounding the prison. Nationally, Ely became a reference point. Journalists writing about Supermax prisons frequently compared it to ADX Florence and Pelican Bay. Academic studies cited Ely in discussions about isolation and mental health. Advocacy groups used it as an example of what happens when control becomes the overriding principle. According to policy analysts, Ely represented the extreme end of American incarceration philosophy, a place where safety was achieved through separation rather than rehabilitation. Yet the prison did not exist in a vacuum. Ely was shaped by decades of tough-on-crime policies, sentencing laws, and political pressures. Many of the men held there were serving life sentences or decades-long terms under statutes passed during eras of heightened fear about violent crime. Ely did not create those policies. It absorbed their consequences. The legacy of Ely State Prison is therefore not simple. It is not a story of heroes and villains, nor is it a cautionary tale with an easy moral. It is a record of decisions layered upon decisions, each made in the name of safety, order, or necessity. According to public records, many of those decisions were defensible within their context. According to later analysis, many carried costs that were underestimated or ignored. Today, Ely remains operational, still one of the most secure prisons in the country. But it operates under a different level of scrutiny than it once did. Oversight is tighter. Reporting is more frequent. The assumption that extreme isolation can exist without consequence has been fundamentally challenged. For those who work there, Ely leaves a complicated legacy. Some former officers have said they believed in the mission, that they prevented violence and saved lives by containing the most dangerous individuals. Others have acknowledged the toll the environment took on them, the stress of constant vigilance, the emotional distance required to function in a place where empathy could feel like a liability. For the men who lived inside its walls, Ely is often described as a place that never truly lets go. According to interviews and affidavits, even years after leaving, former inmates report lingering effects. Difficulty sleeping, trouble interacting with others, a sense of disconnection from time and space. These are not dramatic claims. They are clinical observations documented in medical and legal records. And for the public, Ely stands as a question rather than an answer. How far should a society go to contain those it fears most? At what point does protection become punishment beyond what the law intended? Can a system built on isolation ever produce outcomes beyond containment? Ely State Prison does not offer a resolution to these questions. It offers evidence. It offers records, testimonies, rulings, and lived experiences. Its legacy is written not in myth or rumor, but in documents, courtrooms, and the quiet after a steel door closes. In the end, Ely's story is not just about a prison in the Nevada desert. It is about the limits of control, the cost of absolute security, and the long shadow cast by decisions made in the name of safety. The walls still stand. The doors still lock. But the silence that once defined Ely now carries something else with it. Accountability, scrutiny, and a recognition that even the most secure prison in America is shaped by the choices of the society that built it. And those choices, unlike the men inside Ely, are never truly confined.